Have you ever noticed that some people are more dangerous when they say nothing? That there's a kind of presence that doesn't need volume, doesn't need explanation, and certainly doesn't need your approval? Most people are terrified of silence. They fill every gap, explain every action, justify every decision because somewhere deep down they were taught that silence equals guilt. But what if I told you that silence is the most underrated weapon in the modern world? What if the very thing you've been avoiding is the thing that could make you untouchable? You've been conditioned to believe that power is loud, that dominance requires declaration, that respect comes from being heard. But Machiavelli knew better. He understood that the man who speaks less controls more, because when you stop giving explanations, people start inventing them, and what they invent is always bigger than what you would have said. This isn't about being cold. This isn't about isolation. This is about understanding that your silence can say more than 1,000 words ever could. It's about learning to wield quiet like a blade so sharp, people don't even feel the cut until it's too late. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, this video is your reckoning. Because by the end, you won't just understand the power of silence, you'll know how to weaponize it. And once you do, everything changes. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth. You talk too much, not because you're stupid, but because you're afraid. Afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of seeming rude, afraid that if you don't fill the space, someone else will define you in it. So you explain yourself when no one asked. You justify decisions that don't require justification. You volunteer information that gives others ammunition. And every single time you do, you weaken your position. Because the more you say, the more you reveal. And the more you reveal, the more predictable you become. Predictability is the death of power. Machiavelli knew this. He studied rulers who rose and fell, and the pattern was clear. Those who spoke constantly were easy to manipulate. Those who remained silent were feared. Why? Because silence forces projection. When you don't give people answers, they create their own. And human nature being what it is, they'll always assume you're more dangerous, more intelligent, more calculating than you actually are. That's the paradox. The less you say, the more they think you know. And the more they think you know, the less they'll test you. Now let's go deeper. Silence isn't passive. It's not about shutting down or withdrawing. Real silence, the kind that changes rooms, is active. It's a choice. It's strategic. You're not silent because you have nothing to say. You're silent because you understand that most battles are won before a word is spoken. Think about the last time someone tried to provoke you. Maybe they threw an insult, questioned your competence, tried to embarrass you in public. What did you do? If you're like most people, you responded, you defended, you corrected, and in doing so, you played their game. You entered their frame. You gave them the satisfaction of seeing you react. But what if you had said nothing? What if you had looked at them, not with anger, not with hurt, but with calm indifference? What if you had simply let the accusation hang in the air, unanswered, echoing back on them? That silence would have done something powerful. It would have shifted the weight. Suddenly, they're the one who looks unstable. They're the one who looks desperate. And you look unbothered, untouchable, above it all. That's not weakness, that's dominance without declaration. Here's where it gets tactical. Silence is most effective when it's unexpected, when everyone expects you to speak and you don't. When someone asks a question designed to trap you and you simply smile and say nothing. When you're accused of something, and instead of defending yourself, you let them drown in their own assumptions. This isn't about playing games. This is about understanding that most people use words as crutches. They talk to feel safe. They explain to feel validated. They argue to feel powerful. But you've moved beyond that. You don't need to feel powerful. You are powerful. And that power is rooted in the fact that you've mastered the one thing most people can't, self-control. Because silence requires control. It requires the ability to sit with discomfort, to let tension build without breaking, to resist the urge to fill the void. And that's hard. That's why most people fail at it. They crack, they explain, they justify, and in doing so, they surrender their leverage. Now let's talk about presence, because weaponized silence isn't just about not speaking. It's about how you carry yourself when you're not speaking. Your body language, your eye contact, your stillness. When you're silent, people watch you more closely. They search for cues. They try to read you. And if you've trained yourself to be unreadable, that's when you become dangerous. Think about the people you've met who had this quality. They didn't say much, but when they did, everyone listened. Not because they were loud, but because their silence made their words rare. And rarity creates value. This is the principle Machiavelli applied to leadership. Don't be everywhere. Don't comment on everything. Don't react to every provocation. Save your voice for when it matters. And when you do speak, make it count, make it sharp, make it final, because a man who speaks rarely is a man whose words carry weight, and weight is influence. But here's the trap most people fall into. They confuse silence with passivity. They think being quiet means being weak, and that's where they lose, because real silence, strategic silence, is the opposite of weakness. It's a refusal to play by someone else's rules. It's a statement that says, I don't owe you an explanation. I don't need your approval. I don't fear your judgment. And that terrifies people, because we live in a world where everyone is desperate to be heard, where validation is currency, where silence is misinterpreted as submission. But you're not playing that game anymore. You've realized that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. The most powerful person is the one everyone's trying to figure out, the one who doesn't need to announce themselves, the one whose mere presence shifts the energy. Let's apply this to real scenarios. Imagine you're in a meeting, someone undermines your idea. Everyone's eyes turn to you, waiting for your response. The instinct is to defend, to explain, to prove them wrong. But that's what they expect. That's what they're baiting you into. Instead, you do this. You pause. You look at them, not with anger, not with defensiveness, just calm observation. Then you look away. You let the silence stretch. Let it become uncomfortable. And in that discomfort, something shifts. The room starts to question the person who attacked you, not you. Because your silence communicated something they couldn't put into words: confidence, control, indifference to their opinion. And that's far more powerful than any rebuttal you could have crafted. Now let's go to relationships. Someone accuses you of not caring, of being distant, of changing. The knee-jerk reaction is to reassure, to explain, to prove you do care. But here's the truth. If you have to prove you care, you've already lost, because you've entered their frame, you've accepted their narrative. Instead, you stay silent. You let them sit with their accusation. You let them feel the weight of what they just said. And if you do respond, it's not a defense, it's a redirection. Is that how you see it? Simple, calm, non-reactive. Now, they're the one who has to explain. They're the one on the back foot. And you've maintained your position without surrendering. An inch of power. Here's another layer. Silence creates mystery, and mystery is magnetic. People are drawn to what they don't fully understand. When you're an open book, constantly sharing your thoughts, your feelings, your plans, you give people everything, and what they have in full they take for granted. But when you withhold, when you keep parts of yourself private, when you don't explain every move, you become intriguing. People want to understand you. They want access. They want to know what you're thinking. And that want gives you leverage. This is why the most powerful people in history were often described as enigmatic. Not because they were secretive for the sake of it, but because they understood that the less people know, the more they respect. The more they assume, the more they project onto you their own fears, desires, and interpretations. And in that space of projection, you can move freely. You can act without being predicted. You can lead without being questioned. Because people have already decided you're several steps ahead, and you didn't have to say a word to make them believe it. Now let's address the fear. Because if you're honest with yourself, the reason you talk so much isn't confidence. It's insecurity. You're afraid that if you don't explain yourself, people will think the worst. You're afraid that if you stay quiet, you'll be seen as weak or guilty or irrelevant. But that fear is the chain. That's what keeps you controllable. Because as long as you need people to understand you, they have power over you. As long as you need to be seen in a certain way, you'll bend yourself to fit their perception. But when you let go of that need, when you accept that you can't control what people think, and you stop trying, something miraculous happens. You become free to be misunderstood, free to be judged, free to be silent. And in that freedom, you find real power. Because now your peace isn't dependent on their opinion. Your value isn't tied to their validation. Your identity isn't shaped by their narrative. You've taken it all back, and that's when you become dangerous. Here's a drill. For the next week, practice this. When someone asks you a question that's designed to make you explain yourself, don't answer with a question, deflect with calm, or simply say, "I don't feel the need to explain that." Watch what happens. Watch how uncomfortable they become. Watch how they scramble to fill the void. Watch how the power dynamic shifts in real time. This isn't about being rude. It's about reclaiming your energy. It's about refusing to justify your existence to people who haven't earned the right to question it. And it's about training yourself to sit with the discomfort of being misunderstood. Because once you're comfortable with that, you're unstoppable. Now let's talk about the difference between silence and avoidance. Because they're not the same. Avoidance is running. It's fear-based. It's passive. You avoid because you can't handle confrontation. You avoid because you're afraid of conflict. That's not strength. That's survival mode. Strategic silence is different. It's a choice made from a place of power, not fear. You're not avoiding the conversation. You're choosing not to engage on their terms. You're not running from conflict. You're refusing to give it the energy it doesn't deserve. This distinction is everything. Because one makes you look weak, the other makes you look untouchable. And people can feel the difference. They might not be able to articulate it, but they know. They sense whether your silence comes from strength or fear. And if it's strength, they'll back off. They'll respect it. They'll leave you alone. Not because you told them to, but because your presence communicated it louder than words ever could. Let's go even deeper. Silence is also protection. In a world where everything you say can be recorded, screenshot, taken out of context and used against you, silence is your armor. The less you say, the less ammunition you give. The fewer explanations you offer, the fewer contradictions they can find. This is Machiavellian survival in the digital age. Don't post every thought. Don't comment on every controversy. Don't defend yourself publicly. Let your actions speak. Let your results speak. And let your silence be the wall they can't climb. Because once you've given them your words, you've given them your vulnerability. And in this era, vulnerability without strategy is suicide. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Weaponized silence will cost you. It will cost you people who need you to be loud. It will cost you spaces where you're expected to perform. It will cost you relationships built on constant validation. And that's okay, because what you're building is something stronger. You're building a presence that doesn't need external noise to be felt. You're building a reputation that isn't dependent on explanation. You're building a life where your peace isn't negotiable. And the people who can't handle that, they were never meant to be in your circle anyway. This is the filtering process. The ones who stay are the ones who respect your boundaries. The ones who leave are the ones who only valued you when you were easy to control. Here's the final piece. Silence isn't just a tactic, it's a philosophy. It's a way of moving through the world with less friction and more intention. It's about understanding that you don't owe anyone access to your thoughts, that your internal world is yours to guard, that not everything needs to be said, shared, or explained. This is the mindset of the sovereign individual, the one who doesn't need the crowd's approval to know their worth, the one who doesn't need to announce their moves because they're confident in the outcome, the one who understands that real power doesn't advertise. It simply is. And when you embody that, when you carry yourself with that level of calm certainty, people feel it. They don't know what it is, but they feel it, and they respond to it, not with love necessarily, but with respect, with caution, with a quiet awareness that you're not someone to be tested. So here's your question. Are you ready to stop explaining yourself? Are you ready to stop justifying your decisions to people who don't matter? Are you ready to embrace the discomfort of being misunderstood in exchange for the freedom of being unshakable? Because once you make that choice, there's no going back. You'll see how much energy you were wasting, how much power you were giving away, how much of your life was spent performing for an audience that was never going to applaud anyway. And in that realization, you'll find something rare. You'll find peace, not the kind that comes from being liked, but the kind that comes from being unbreakable, from being so solid in who you are that nothing anyone says can move you. And that, my friend, is the ultimate power. This is what they don't teach you. This is what the world doesn't want you to know, because a person who has mastered silence is a person who can't be controlled. They can't be baited. They can't be provoked. They can't be manipulated. And in a world that runs on reaction, someone who refuses to react is a threat. So they'll try to pull you back in. They'll accuse you of being cold, distant, arrogant. They'll say you've changed, that you're not the same, and you'll smile because you know what they're really saying. They're saying they've lost their leverage. They're saying you're no longer easy to control. And that terrifies them because deep down, they know the person who needs nothing from you holds all the power. Now let's talk about how silence changes you internally, because this isn't just about how others perceive you. It's about how you begin to perceive yourself. When you stop constantly explaining, defending, and justifying, you create space. Space to think, space to feel, space to observe. And in that space, you start to see things clearly. You see who actually respects you versus who just tolerates you. You see which relationships are reciprocal and which are parasitic. You see patterns you were too distracted to notice before. This clarity is gold because it allows you to make better decisions, not emotional decisions, not reactive decisions, but strategic, intentional, aligned decisions. And those are the decisions that build empires, internal and external. Silence gives you back your mind. It stops the constant outflow of energy and redirects it inward. And when that energy is directed inward, it becomes fuel. Fuel for creation, fuel for discipline, fuel for transformation. Here's the paradox. The more silent you become, the more powerful your words become when you do choose to speak. Think about it. If someone talks all the time, their words lose weight. But if someone rarely speaks, and then they do, everyone stops and listens. That's scarcity. That's value. And you can manufacture that value by being selective, by choosing when to speak and when to stay silent. This doesn't mean you become mute. It means you become intentional. You don't waste words on people who won't appreciate them. You don't waste energy on arguments that won't change anything. You conserve. You focus. You strike when it matters. And when you do, it's devastating because people aren't used to hearing you. They're not prepared. They don't have a defense ready. And in that moment of unpreparedness, your words land with force. Let's apply this to influence. If you want to influence someone, silence is your greatest tool. Not talking at them, not convincing them, but listening, observing, and only speaking when you've identified the exact lever to pull. Most people try to influence through volume. They think if they say enough, eventually something will stick. But that's weak. That's scattershot. The strategist does the opposite. They say less, they listen more, they gather data. And then, when the moment is right, they speak one sentence that changes everything. That's precision. That's mastery. And it only works if you've trained yourself to be comfortable in silence long enough to observe what others miss. Now let's address loneliness, because yes, this path can be lonely. When you stop engaging in meaningless small talk, when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop performing, a lot of people will fall away, and that can hurt. But here's the truth, that loneliness is temporary. It's the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. On the other side of that gap, you'll find a different kind of connection, deeper, more real, with people who don't need you to perform, who respect your silence, who understand that you don't owe them constant entertainment or explanation. Those are your people, and they're rare, but they're worth the wait. In the meantime, you learn to be comfortable with yourself, and that's the real prize. Because once you're comfortable in your own silence, you're no longer afraid of being alone. And when you're not afraid of being alone, no one can threaten you with abandonment. No one can manipulate you with guilt. No one can control you with the promise of belonging. You've become self-sufficient, and that's freedom. Here's a warning. People will test you. Especially in the beginning, they'll poke, they'll prod, they'll try to get a reaction. They'll accuse you of being fake or cold or playing games. And every fiber of your being will want to defend yourself. Don't. That's the test. And if you break, you lose. But if you stay calm, if you remain silent, if you let their accusations dissolve into the void, you pass. And once they realize they can't get to you, they'll stop trying. Or they'll leave. Either way, you win, because you've established a boundary, a line they can't cross, and that line is your peace. Let's talk about power dynamics. In any relationship, personal or professional, the person who needs less has more power, and silence is the ultimate demonstration of needing less. When someone tries to provoke you and you don't react, you're showing them you don't need their approval or their conflict. When someone tries to get you to explain yourself and you don't, you're showing them you don't need their understanding. That shift is massive, because now they need you more than you need them. They need you to react so they can feel relevant. They need you to explain so they can feel in control. But you're not giving them that. And in that refusal, you've flipped the script. You're no longer the one being tested. You're the one setting the standard, and they're the ones scrambling to meet it. Here's the mastery level. Eventually, you reach a point where silence isn't something you do. It's something you are. It's not a tactic you pull out when you need it. It's your default state. You don't talk unless there's a reason. You don't explain unless it serves you. You don't react unless it aligns with your purpose. And at that point, you've transcended the game. You're not playing anymore. You're just living. And people feel that. They sense that you're operating on a different frequency, and it either attracts them or repels them. And either way, you're fine with it. Because you're not trying to be liked, you're trying to be at peace, and peace doesn't come from being understood, it comes from not needing to be. Here's the final truth. The world will never stop demanding explanations from you. It will never stop trying to provoke you. It will never stop testing your boundaries. But that's okay, because you've learned something most people never will. You've learned that you don't have to respond to every demand. You don't have to engage with every provocation. You don't have to defend every accusation. You can simply exist, unbothered, unshaken, unbreakable. And in that existence, you become a force. Not because you're loud, not because you're aggressive, but because you're immovable. And immovability in a world of chaos is the highest form of power. So here's your assignment. Starting today, practice silence, not as punishment, not as avoidance, but as power. When someone tries to pull you into drama, stay silent. When someone asks you to explain yourself, don't. When someone tries to provoke you, smile and walk away. And watch what happens. Watch how the energy shifts. Watch how people start treating you differently. Watch how Your internal peace starts to grow. This isn't easy. It goes against everything you've been taught, but it works. And once you experience the power of weaponized silence, you'll never go back to the old way. Because the old way was exhausting. The old way was giving your power away. The old way was playing a game you were never meant to win. But this new way, this is your way. And on this path, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to explain anything. You just need to be. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. If you made it this far, you're not here by accident. You felt something. You recognize something in yourself that's been whispering for a long time. And that whisper is getting louder. Listen to it. Because it's the part of you that knows you're capable of more, that knows you don't have to live in reaction, that knows you can reclaim your power, one silent moment at a time. So here's what I want you to do. Comment below. Silence is my power. Not for me, not for the algorithm, but for you, as a declaration, as a commitment, as a reminder that from this moment forward, you're no longer giving your energy to people and situations that don't deserve it. And if this resonated with you, subscribe, because we're going deeper. We're going to dismantle every lie you've been told about who you need to be. And we're going to rebuild you into someone who doesn't need permission, validation, or applause. Someone who moves in silence and lets their presence do the talking. I'll see you in the next one, or I won't. Either way, you know what to do. Stay silent, stay dangerous, stay free.